Hello there, I'm Ken Robinson, and I'm really pleased to be asked to contribute to the second session of Agoratalentia. I'm really sorry, let me begin with this apology, that I'm not able to be there with you in person. I was the first time this group met 2 years ago, and was delighted to make the journey to Pamplona. I've simply this last few months had a few health issues, nothing really that's going to be a long-term problem, but my doctor has recommended I cut back a bit on travel, at least for the time being. So regretfully, I wasn't able to make the trip this time, but the organisers of the session this year kindly agreed to let me contribute this way, and I was very pleased to do it because I'm a great supporter of Agoratalentia. In fact, such a great supporter that I was delighted to be asked to be on the advisory committee, which I have agreed to do, and I look forward to a continued association with the important work that's being talked about over these couple of days. I've been asked to talk a little bit about the challenges for creativity and innovation, particularly in the context of economic change. I published a book 10 years ago, which is called Out of Our Minds, Learning to be Creative. And it was a book that was addressed equally to businesses and to education. And my argument is that we need to look at developing creativity systematically in our education systems, firstly because it's vital to the development and fulfillment of our children, but also because it's a vital economic imperative. Our countries and our futures globally depend now on the powers of innovation and creativity to enable us to confront the many challenges that lie ahead. And I believe that some of these challenges are unprecedented in our history on the planet. I know that sounds like a bold claim, but if you look at the combined effects of technology, of population change, of challenges to the world's natural environment, and the strain on our natural resources, I think you'll agree that the challenges that we face now are really unique and of a different character. So creativity is, to me, both an economic and a personal imperative. It's also a cultural imperative. It's about enabling people to coexist, to work together, and to collaborate. There was a report written by IBM and published last year, which was based on a survey of the attitudes and experiences of the heads of organizations around the world. They spoke with 3,000 CEOs and heads of organizations, which range from for-profit organizations, that's to say commercial corporations. They included heads of universities, of not-for-profit organizations, and people who are prominent in the public sector, in government and in local government. And what they asked them to say was, what are the major challenges that they believe they face now as leaders of organizations? And it's very interesting to me because they identified essentially three challenges. The first of them was, how do you deal with increasing complexity in the world around us? And I think most of us would agree that the world is becoming ever more complex and complicated. So how do you steer organizations through times of rapid and turbulent change where values and ways of doing business are becoming more and more pressing and urgent? Secondly, the priority they believe they face is, how do you lead organizations so that they can become adaptable and flexible to change? Many styles of management and leadership are still rooted in ideas of efficiency and of linear production. These are ideas which have been born out of the growth of the manufacturing industry. But for the future, we need organizations which are resilient and flexible. So how do you do that, and what are the implications for leaders? The third priority, which was identified across all of these sectors was of a special interest to the Agoratalentia process, which they identified as how do you lead organizations that promote creativity. So these three things, creativity, adaptability, and complexity, were at the heart of the concerns of many leaders now around the world. And creativity, of course, connects to these other two priorities in a fundamental way. The challenge, though, you see, I believe, is not to promote occasional creativity. We all have good ideas from time to time. The challenge is how to create a culture where creativity is systematic and reliable, where you can depend on the ability of the people in the organization to come up with new ideas and new solutions. One of the big challenges is to define creativity, and I remember being asked to talk a little bit about this at the first meeting of the Agoratalentia. So for those of you who weren't there, let me offer this definition. I define creativity as the process of having original ideas that have value. The process of having original ideas that have value. And for me, it's important to emphasize that you can be creative at anything. It's not just one thing or another. That everybody has profound creative abilities, and that people can be helped to become more creative. And that's really the theme of the book that I mentioned, Out of Our Minds, Learning to be Creative. The book was originally published 10 years ago, and my publisher asked me if I'd like to do a new edition to mark the 10th anniversary. To be honest, I had in mind a quiet weekend making some spelling corrections in the book, perhaps with a decent bottle of Chianti. In fact, I spent about 6 months rewriting the whole book. And the reason was that so much has happened in the past 10 years. If you think of it, 10 years ago, there were no smartphones, no iPads, no iPods, there were no social media to speak of. Google was still a novelty for most people. There was no Facebook, no Twitter. Yet all the indications are that these extraordinary changes that have taken place in the last 10 years will be outnumbered by the changes that may lie ahead in the next 10 years. So the book is a brand new edition, but it's attacking these three questions. But firstly, why is it so important to promote creativity, strategically and culturally and personally? Secondly, why is it that so many people think they're not creative? This always amazes me, that many adults think they're not creative, and yet all children think they are creative, up to a certain age. I think one of the answers, by the way, is education. I think that we educate our children out of their creative abilities. And the third theme of the book is, so what do we do about this? How do we make things better and different so that creativity becomes a habit and not an accident? You see, it seems to me that all organizations face two challenges, or two types of challenge. To begin with, there is, so to speak, an external challenge. What I mean by this is that the world around all of us is changing so rapidly and so fundamentally that for many organizations, the challenge is simply to understand and keep pace with these changes. And I say there are two big drivers. One of them is technology, and the other is population change and population growth, and the impact all of that has on our use of natural resources. And these external challenges apply whether you're running a school, a kindergarten, a university, or a corporation. I've actually been involved recently, to some degree, with a movement that's coming out of America called conscious capitalism. It's a very interesting set of principles that underpins this. It was actually based on some work that was done by John Mackey, who was the founder of Whole Foods. And the principle is really very straightforward, which is that given the challenges to our resources and the growing complexity and so on of the world, that we need forms of business, ways of doing business now, which of course are not negligent of making profit. All businesses need to make profit. But the issue is, how do you make profits these days in a way that's sustainable and ethical? And how do you create new businesses which contribute to the common welfare rather than act simply as selfish sources of profit-making. So conscious capitalism, to me, indicates a move that's happening in the commercial sector, but I get the opportunity these days to travel extensively. In fact, I would have traveled extensively to Pamplona if I could have done, but to travel in Europe and America, Asia, the Middle East. The conversations that are happening here today at Agoratalentia are reflected in conversations that are happening all around the world. Throughout the world, people are trying to understand how do we best prepare ourselves, engage all of our talents to meet this emergent future and help to shape this future. These conversations are happening in education and in business. And in education particularly, there are reform movements which are attempting to do this, but I believe are often not doing this because they don't address the fundamental issues of change that we need to see introduced. But these aren't isolated movements, and I believe that there's some grounds for optimism, partly because through the new social media and in other ways, I believe there is a growing shift of consciousness, and people are trying to get to grips with this new agenda. So the book is partly about that, and this is also what the Agoratalentia is about. What it comes to, I think, is that we need a strategy for creativity and innovation based on a clear understanding of what's involved. My definition, as I say, is the process of having original ideas that have value. And I see it as a three-tier strategy, and that within each of these three tiers, there are some principles that we should pay attention to, which I've set out in more detail in the book. But let me just headline them here, if I may, as a framework for conversation. So there are three roles, and as I see it, at least three principles for each, so 9 in total. I don't mean these are the only principles, but they're 9 principles that I think are an important foundation for the changes that we want to see. The first area of action for a strategy for innovation to meet the challenges we face is personal. We have to recognize, I believe, that creativity is a personal process. That's to say that it's people who have ideas, and that we all have immense natural capacities for creativity. The challenge is to develop them. It's a bit like seeing some people who can speak many languages and some people who can speak only one. It isn't that some people are capable of speaking many languages and some people are not. It's that some people live in situations of linguistic diversity where they naturally absorb a number of languages. We all have that capability. Whether we develop it is a different thing. So under personal development, I see 3 principles. The first is that everybody has creative potential. So if you're interested in a strategy for creativity, it has to involve everybody. I mean everybody in your company, if you're running a company, or every child in the school, and not just every child, but every teacher. We are all born with immense capacities, and the first step in a creative strategy is to recognize that and to help people to uncover them and develop them. I published a book 18 months ago, which is available now in 20 languages, I'm pleased to say, including Spanish, which is called The Element, How Finding Your Passion Changes Everything. And that book is about the nature of individual talent and what we can do to promote and develop it.